All right, everyone, welcome to another week of Psych 4421. This is our topic for today, which is dating, intimacy, and sexuality as it relates to human development. So we are wrapping up the semester, we're closing things out, so let's go ahead and get started. So as we've been talking about human development, it's important for us to remember that human development is shaped by numerous factors. They include our biological, our psychological, and our social experiences. So that would be our genetics, our mental capacity and health, and also how we socialize and interact with those around us. And dating, intimacy, and sexuality are important social experiences that we have from being like an adolescence into our adulthood. And these experiences actually shape who we are as people and how we end up developing when we get older. So it also impacts how we relate to other people and ultimately also how we regulate our emotions. So there was research conducted, and it basically shows and evaluates that romantic relationships are meaningful in developmental context rather than just optional life events. So these events, researchers found, are very important to our developmental functioning. So when we think about intimacy and relationships, dating is a big part of this, and dating looks different across the lifespan as well. So dating relationships can also play an important role in our development. During our adolescence in particularly, dating often helps individuals practice communication, emotion regulation, how to healthily resolve conflict. And these early relationships and experiences also contribute to identity exploration, also autonomy, figuring out who we are, what we want, and what that may be like in our future. And researchers ultimately argued that adolescent romantic relationships and these experiences are actually developmentally appropriate, that they are part of being an adolescent and figure out who you are. Whereas in adulthood, dating actually reflects a very different path. It reflects changing in goals, meaning we're looking for more compassion, commitment, is their ability to build a family if that's something that person wants. And ultimately, emerging adulthood also highlights how relationship exploration has become more common during the late teens and in our 20s. And then we become more established in these relationships, generally speaking, when we get older. So ultimately, kind of each stage of our life when it comes to relationships is going to look a little different. From adolescence, it's very developmentally appropriate and it's a big part of exploration. Whereas if we're going into adulthood, we're looking for a little bit more. So if we're thinking about intimacy and also intimacy as it relates to attachment, we did talk about attachment styles very early on in this course. And intimacy in these early relationship experiences actually do strongly influence the attachment styles we may have. So it's a combination of what the parent-child relationship was like, but also the relationship that we have in romantic relationships. So when we think about intimacy, it actually is referring to emotional closeness, trust, vulnerability, mutual support between individuals. When we sometimes think of intimacy in the romantic context, it's actually a very important framework because it means we're having that emotional closeness. One of the most important frameworks for understanding intimacy is actually attachment theory. So researchers have evaluated attachment theory into adulthood by evaluating and showing that caregiver relationships can shape how individuals actually behave in our romantic relationships. So I'll give you an example. So if we are in a securely attached, we're securely attached adults, meaning we had securely attached parent-child relationships, we are often more comfortable with closeness and trust. But if we had very insecure attachment from our childhood, it's going to be linked to a lot more anxiety, avoidance, potential conflict. So researchers additionally also evaluate and emphasize that intimacy actually develops through communication and also kind of how there is mutual responsiveness between partners. So overall intimacy, trust is extremely important in developing a healthy relationship. So sexuality is also a very normal part of human development. It's a big part of human development and relationships, and it develops across the lifespan. Researchers have evaluated that sexuality is healthiest when it occurs in the context of consent, communication, and also mutual respect. So those three things are very important when it comes to sexuality. Studies have evaluated and found that sexual satisfaction in particular is actually strongly associated with relationship satisfaction. So those two things are related, sexual satisfaction and relationship satisfaction. And that emotional well-being is also attached to that as well. So those three things kind of live together. In addition, additional researchers, they actually found that sexual experiences are not always automatically positive or negative. Instead, outcome depends on factors such as like relationship quality, readiness, or even psychological context. So this really highlights the idea that sexuality and viewing sexuality really develops through the lens and through our adulthood and as we ultimately develop. So now if we think about adult relationships, romantic relationships ultimately do continue into our adulthood. They just look generally a little different than when we're adolescents. These high quality, healthy adult relationships are generally associated with lower stress, greater happiness in the relationship, and also they are linked with better mental health. So the healthier our relationship is, the better mental health, happiness, and less stress we have. Researchers did find that marital quality, so the quality of that relationship, the healthiness, if we want to think it in that capacity, can actually significantly impact the emotional and physical health outcomes over time. So if we are in an unhealthy relationship, we're arguing all the time, we're disagreeing all the time, it is just fight after fight, it feels very hostile, well, we're more than susceptible to physical and emotional health concerns. So it's important to understand that having a healthy relationship and having that communication and trust and honesty is important for ourselves, our mental health, and our physical and emotional health as well. So a supportive partner actually may promote resilience and longevity, while a lot of conflict can actually create stress and harm the well-being. So there's an association, greatly with this. Researchers actually additionally found that healthy romantic relationships are very much associated with psychological well-being, especially among emerging adults. So if we think about it, if we're an emerging adult, it's really important we have healthy relationships because it's ultimately going to positively impact our mental health and physical health. So as we kind of wrap this all up and kind of conclude our time today, it's important for us to understand that dating, intimacy, and sexuality are ultimately lifelong journeys and influences when it comes to our development. Romantic experiences, they help shape our identity, they help shape our emotional functioning, our communication skills, our health outcomes, our ability to emotionally regulate. So they actually impact a lot more than we may think. From adolescence to adult partnerships, relationships actually remain one of the most important social contexts of growth. Because if we think about it, we are interested in adolescence with our friends and our peers in developing romantic connections. And when we go into emerging adulthood, we're really interested in having long-lasting relationships. So researchers overall evaluate that consistency shows that secure attachment is going to lead to healthy communication, supportive intimacy, and overall thriving relationships, whereas the opposite is going to lead to negative outcomes. So overall, understanding these processes and how romantic connections impact us as humans is very important because it's able to help us learn about ourselves. So we are wrapping up this week, and I look forward to seeing you next week.